G'day and welcome back to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez. Thanks again for joining me on the podcast. Hope everyone had a safe end of year, New Year's break. Looking forward to a very different 2021. Hoping everyone is okay, happy and healthy. And as always, thank you for joining me for these podcasts. This is the first podcast to kick off the 2021 year in the first week of February. I'd like to thank all of my previous podcast guests and over to today's podcast guest. This particular discussion was a poignant one for me in that my guest on today's podcast, I should say, was a school friend, primary and secondary here in Brisbane. It's amazing to see people that you remember from childhood have gone through their journeys, whatever that might look like, to get to the positions where they are. And my guest today has certainly had an interesting leadership pathway. Today's guest is the owner of Character Builders, Eco-Educate, Character Care, and WebCred. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Damon Joseph. I began the podcast by asking Damon about some of the history to these businesses that he's established, and then getting into where we always do with the start of the podcast, which is talking about his leader pathway. As always, thank you for joining me, and I'll hand over to Damon.
Well, mate, we started off with Character Builders, and that was sort of born out of a desire to bring out the best in people and give people the narrative and the strengths that they have and the opportunity to be the best versions of themselves. And so we're able to work in schools and organisations and be able to focus on leadership, team building and character development. I'll try and keep each one a little bit brief for you. Character Care came along soon after. And that was an idea where individuals and organisations would say, look, do you do any therapeutic sort of services on the back of the leadership and team building stuff that we've done? And the answer was no, but I had a lot of good people in my network that did. And so we rallied together and started Character Care. And now we offer therapeutic services for individuals and corporate groups, so psychologists, counsellors and general social support. From that, the understanding of working with lots of different people, young ones, old ones, and especially in the last 3 or 4 years, a huge influx and desire to do more for the planet came about, and started to get this holistic feeling that you can't be great in character and be the very person that you've called to be on this earth without actually treating that same earth in the best possible way you can as well. So treating oneself well and treating one's surrounding well seemed to be a good synergy. And then finally, WebCred was developed, and it was actually born on the back of connecting with people that had done work for me and were looking to expand their business, but were just struggling to penetrate the market a little bit more. And so connectivity with their fellow human beings. I've got no idea about digital marketing and websites, but people who I came in contact with do. And so I started to realise, well, maybe I can help a little bit here, and together we collaborated and ended up starting WebCred as a consultancy as well.
Wow. So I guess the first question is, do you sleep?
Yeah, I sleep really well, actually. I think maybe that's why I do sleep well. I'm doing a fair bit. But each one of those things seems to me to be something that I just feel really privileged to be doing. And everyone always says, if you enjoy what you're doing, then it doesn't feel like work. And I think that's the reason for me.
Yeah, well, more power to you, sir, and best of luck with that. It's a good thing that in a career you can get to a point where you can say that and be happy about those circumstances. And we all have very different perspectives on that. I still am in awe of people that hang out their own shingle and take a chance and do that stuff. And it's building on the previous podcast, I guess, this idea of relying on networks. You use that word a fair bit just in introducing your businesses. That I'm assuming that those people in your networks have helped to build where you've gotten to in each of those businesses. Is that fair assessment?
Very fair. And not just from an associate or collegial sort of point of view, but also the customer. Customer often tells you what they really want or what they love about what you do. And so you're just being open-minded to hear actually what's going on around you and utilise the people around you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me, mate. So let's get into the first of these themes, if I can, with you. Your leadership pathway and its beginnings. How did this all kick off, Dan?
I was a school teacher, mate. Believe it or not, you probably remember me at school. So going back to school probably seemed like something pretty different to what one would expect. But I enjoyed people, and schools are full of people. And I also enjoyed sport, so the two married together. But I found out what I was not as good at school was teaching the sport in another area of accounting, what I was actually very good at was catching up with the students, whether it was before, during or after school, and they'd often come and confide in me. And I just loved that interaction with them. And I also loved the interaction with my colleagues. And I realised, wow, it'd be much nicer if I could just work on people than sport or accounting and being in an institution as such. I just wanted to be a bit freer. So that's why I left. And it's amazing how people see you, hear you differently when you come back in to the same environment, but as a consultancy and not as an employee.
And this is where, and for those that are following the podcast, I'm offline. Obviously, we won't be able to hear that bit of the discussion, but I was talking to Damon about whether these questions and themes were about entrepreneurship or about his leadership, and even now I'm still with that question in particular. That when you're your own boss, you can set more of the agenda and you can do what you're more passionate about. And this is no disrespect to the school system, whether it's private or public or primary, secondary, or in the tertiary sector, that those institutions are institutions for a reason, and they have their limitations, and you either choose to work in those limitations or you don't. And obviously you've decided not, and you've branched out and decided to create your own little institution and led by you. And I get that. And the more I'm talking to people, Damon, I think I'm learning here that there are some individuals that could never go back to being an employee. And given what I know of where your pathway is, I don't think you could go back to that either. Is that a fair call? Like this is now you for the rest of your days, or could you go back and work for someone?
I'd find it difficult. I think I'm sure I could be humbled in a situation if things just didn't work out. Then I'd get straight back on the tools and do it. And maybe, you're a little bit wiser about how you go about it. But Eric, I like how you are certainly complimentary of schools, because they're amazing. They're amazing beasts. It's very difficult, and all the teachers and the school staff that are in there running it and doing it, they are real champions. And, to get out of that system, you just have to ask yourself the question, am I fulfilling my best self? And am I being of the best service to everyone in this? And, some people are just amazing. They do it, and I just wasn't one of them. I felt my calling was to go out and then come back.
Thank you for that. I guess I came to a love of education later in my life. And again, we've had these discussions offline, and I'm not going to self-disclose some of what I would like to say online, because it's not what the podcast is about, because it's about you. But suffice it to say that in my later life, I've seen more of the value of school, because my kids are benefiting from the school system, and I see how hard the teachers work to get to that point, and their struggles, and that being that I'm not from the school system but from the private sector in an advocacy, industry advocacy point of view, that you can see where the choke points are, but teachers in schools only have so much capacity to make changes themselves. Surprised at all that you end up going down the teaching pathway, mate. From what I remember of high school, it doesn't surprise me. Neither does that connection to sport. And it's, again, another conversation I had offline with a previous guest about, the question was asked, what did you learn from your first 100 podcasts? And I'm getting a sense from a lot of the leaders that I'm talking about that sport has had a part to play in their leadership pathway one way or the other, and that's something I want to explore down the track, and it might be something we could talk about at another point, but this is about you, Damon. So let me ask you the next theme, if I can. Leadership and management. It used to be for me leadership versus management. I think the two are very much connected, at least in my mind. But for you, are they two separate and distinct functions, or is there some overlap? What have you seen, given that you're running multiple very different businesses? Still connected, but not all the same, obviously.
Yeah, I definitely think there's overlap there. Sometimes I think the difference is empowering others to lead. So you can try and manage everything. And maybe if I use the term micromanagement, it would be really crazy, I think, for, depending on the organisation situation, obviously, but for any leader who understands that they do overlap. I think you have to be able to take a real step back and empower those who work with you to almost feel like they are capable of managing themselves. So in my maybe methodology, if I'm just sort of feeling my way through the question, mate, I feel like for me, it's about handing over the power and responsibility, and for me to move more into a leadership role, especially as our businesses evolved and grown, I found great success in removing any sort of management understanding from my role, empowering somebody else with that capacity, and stepping back in leadership and showing that I can easily lead from behind by just supporting you to step up and do the best that you can do. And then the progression for me, mate, is that in 2, 3, 4 years' time, or whenever this person has shown that they're ready to take the next step, then it's time for them to step back and maybe lead the new wave of management that comes through.
Sure. Was that difficult to do? And again, I'll draw on some of the discussions I've had with entrepreneurs of various kinds. That is it hard to cut the what do they call it? The fictitious umbilical cord and let someone else make those daily decisions. Did you find that hard?
I think now that you pose the question, in some ways, I think the hardest bit is just to stop and give the opportunity, not to go in and rescue. If they don't do it the way that you do it, you have to remind yourself, well, I have to remind myself, you had all of this time to teeth and to make mistakes. So that was probably the hardest bit initially. But then after you see the growth, the success and the empowerment, then you know you're doing the right thing. And the communication between you and the so-called manager, it starts to really blossom, because they start telling you that they can feel empowered and thank you for the opportunity. And it's not about the gratitude, but it's about the affirmation that this actually works. So it wasn't too hard, mate. Actually, it was almost rewarding to think that, and being in a leadership consultancy as well, you want to think that you're getting some of it right. Otherwise, you have to question what you're doing.
Yeah, that's true, mate. I would have loved to have had managers like you when I was coming up as a younger bloke. It sounds like a good place to work. And this kind of segues nicely into the next topic area, which I think I'm going to split into two bits, because I think there's something here based on what you've said so far on the podcast. I'll go to the first bit. The lonely road of leadership. Is leadership as lonely as you want to make it, or is there some necessity that there's going to be times when you're going to be making decisions in isolation, or do you not see that as a lonely pathway? And why I ask this is that for the leaders and the entrepreneurs and the emerging young people that I've spoken to in leadership roles, there's been a mix of, yeah, it is, but you have networks, or you have mentors, or it's as lonely as you make it. In your travels, in your pathway, what has that looked like for you, mate?
For me personally, either I've been very blessed. I think you can start in different positions. As you say, a network. I mean, for me, it's family always. You've got someone in the corner, in your corner all the time. You can't fail. But I think what it comes from in terms of loneliness is sometimes when you do take a risk and you go out and you challenge, let's say, the status quo, or you even challenge what close friends and families think is going to be a success, that's when you can have a few lonely moments and think, actually, am I doing the right thing here? But the thing that stood out to me the most, and I still stand by this really strongly today, is if you know your value set and if you know what you stand for. And I think the thing I often tell even our team and the young people, old people that we work with, is if you know your narrative, if you generally have a number of snippets of stories that tell you why you're a decent person, why you're capable of doing what you're doing, what makes you passionate, almost like the ikigai. What does the world need? What am I good at? How can I turn this into something I can have an income with? And, real purpose behind what you do. It doesn't matter what comes your way, Eric. It doesn't matter what hits you. Even if someone wants to have a really robust argument with you, I think if you know where you come from and it's genuinely a good place, you never feel lonely, because you're in touch with yourself. And I think if each one of us could spend part of our career reflecting often about, why am I doing what I'm doing? How can I genuinely go to bed each night thinking, I'm doing my thing, I'm doing the best I can do, then it's never a lonely road.
Measures of success. Now, it's easy to pull out the monetary one, and everyone has a goal that they want for income and so on. And I think it's not the best measure personally. But for you, what do you use as your measure of success other than your standard KPIs, mate? What does success look like in the world of Damon Joseph when he's out there doing his thing? What does success look like for you?
Yeah, I think if you probably asked even my team, they'd probably say we don't really have that many KPIs as such. They do come about because of investment in people. So success for me is always what comes back from our team in terms of our culture. Culture breeds performance, and performance in turn gives you all those other things that helps the business to keep going, growing, and receive the accolades that it gets. For me, it's again, going back to your narrative, as I sort of mentioned before, I love the fact that I can support my family. And sometimes it's not about going on the holidays and having nice things like good cars and a nice house and those sorts of things. For me, like, I love to be able to shout my parents to dinner. That's an incredible success for me.
Leader capabilities. What do you believe are the core capabilities for people in the leadership space? Now, not so much managers, but your leaders, those ones that you're entrusting to lead the organisation, or if not that, for you, what do you think are your core leader capabilities that you think are critical?
The thing that jumps out at me is humility. I find when you are leading a situation, it's so easy for pressure to come to you, and everyone's saying, well, okay, the buck stops with you, make a choice. And as soon as the cage gets rattled pretty hard, emotion comes into it. And sometimes the initial response can be one where you want to go out and defense and be on the attack as well. And you're not really sure. You get a bit flustered and heated. And I think I see that a little bit of humility to stop and to ground yourself and think, well, how can I have the best outcome for everyone involved here? And that is to lose the ego, to not pull rank. It's maybe just to go, all right, well, if one of the capabilities I need is to get the lay of the land, what's actually happening here, and why is there tension, what's happened, and how can I be the calm in the storm? They're the first things that jump out at me, Eric.
Yeah, okay. And that's, again, not surprising that that's your response. What about in others? Do you look for that primarily in others, or do you look for other capabilities and skill set in other people? And why I ask that as a question is that a lot of the people that I've spoken to on these podcasts have said, if you don't have a certain skill set, you can either hire it in or develop it in the people that you've got. Would you say that you've got other managers, leaders, your partner in the business, your wife, if she's in the business, yes?
Yeah.
And their skills, their leadership skills are complementary to yours, or mirror yours? What does that look like in your world, mate? Are they complementary or in addition to what you already bring to the table?
Yeah, I love this question. It's certainly it's what I don't have, and in some cases what I do. I think particularly, I'll start with my wife. We're quite different in personality, and I know that even the way that I like to lead and my outlook and philosophy, I know it doesn't work for others. I get that, and I really invest in people. I've moved away from wanting to please people, which I think I did as a younger bloke. I just want to be with people, and I want to model what I think is the best thing I can do to model. But what I realise in that, mate, is that there are so many missing parts, and I can't expect everyone to always want to see it from my point of view. And I know I just don't have the answer. So enter my wife, Claire, and she can get from A to B really quickly. She's practical. She's super intelligent, although she probably doesn't give herself that credit as much. And but what she brings is just such a healthy addition, and she's largely responsible for the success of what we do as well. Purely just because she looks at it from a really pragmatic way, I think, and just says, well, let's look at this as it is, and this is what I think. Here's my thoughts. Do with it what you will. And I think, oh, can't ignore that. And then, like from an environmental business, we have these people are absolutely passionate about sustainability and the planet. And our therapists for character care, they're just these incredible people who day in, day out have the capacity, the tools and the heart to sit one-on-one with people and give their very best so that they can be their best. So, mate, I hope I'm answering your question there. I genuinely feel that, you bring to an organisation or to any room, any party, anywhere you turn up in the world, I think you bring a set of strengths. And if there's anything that I've realised, one of my strengths is to bring out those strengths in others And when they bring their strengths, our organisation hums in a way that there's no way it could do with just myself alone. So I don't want to sound like, happy-go-lucky, I love the world. And, it's all about making everyone feel special. It just works, mate, for us. And it's good.
Yeah, and it's to support what you're saying. I've been hearing that quite a bit, that very successful leaders build the capability of others, and it would seem redundant that if you took on leaders that were an exact match for you and didn't complement what you did but were exactly the same, that there would be some degree of stagnation at some point, because there's no new ways of thinking or challenging the way that you think. So I resonate with what you're saying to some degree, because when people challenge me on some stuff, and when they challenge me on the shit that might come out of my mouth if I've got something very wrong, I don't take that as a personal attack. Well, no, I don't now. It's more, okay, tell me what I'm wrong so I can learn from what the hell I got wrong. And I think it takes experience in the world of work, whatever you do, to start bringing in a bit of humility about, because I'm being in my mid-40s now, I'm starting to know that now I'm not going to be here forever, but I've still got a few decades of life left in the old body, that you want to create relationships where people can be open and honest and transparent and all that good stuff that you're saying it may be fluffy. It's really not. It's what makes you click. And I think if you're going to be in the world of work, working for you or working for yourself or working for anyone else, working for me, that you want to make it as a pleasant experience as you can, and butting heads instead of thinking about having complementary skill sets, particularly when it comes to leadership, is I still think an open debate, because I've had leaders and people that have led me that you could tell them the sky, that they would say to you the sky is red or grey, and the sky is blue, and they will argue. They'll never lose the point. They'll argue until they're blue in the face that it's the other way. And I've grown up to not like that view of the world, but I understand that view exists, and sometimes you have to deal with it. And I think people in your situation, where you've got multiple businesses and you've got multiple different contexts in which you work, which I think would make for a great, again talking personally here, which would make for a great daily routine, is that you're never doing the one thing every bloody day. And I think for the grey matter, hopefully you'll never get things like in your older age, things like senility or Alzheimer's, because your brain is constantly ticking on so many different things that it would be quite a challenge to get up every day and go, right, what's the next challenge? And I'm not for a minute suggesting for those listening that it's always going to be peaches and cream every day at work, but I think it would make for an interesting workplace. That said, Damon, and here's one that I've put to every guest that I've had, so no different with you, but I'm very interested to get your feedback on this. Nature versus nurture. Are leaders born or made?
It's interesting. It depends on, I was born into a really privileged environment, so I always felt that, if you've always got somebody in your corner and somebody who's there to help you out, you start on the right foot, if that makes sense. The world's your oyster, so you've got more choice and opportunity. But at the same time, how many times, mate, have we heard of people who've risen from the ashes, or they've suffered extreme poverty, and all of a sudden that's what's been the making of them, and there's almost rebirth, you know what I mean? And so, something that ties in, I think, is a little bit of hardship or something which creates perspective, so that they've got two extremes. And I always find anybody who's experienced even a great start, but then to really suffer or experience, and it's all relative. What's big for one is maybe nothing for another, but it's our life experience. So born or made, I feel like it's what came first, the egg or the chicken. I actually don't know. I think they've both got capacity.
It's incredibly gratifying, and you're not the first to shift uncomfortably with the question. But there's no right or wrong answer here. There's never going to be a right or wrong answer. When I first started asking the question, I thought maybe I'm going to get such a sequence of responses here that it is about being made and not being born. But having said that, I would challenge any leader that's had some years in the game in whatever industry to not know someone that's come out of the blue that you've gone, wow, that person's got almost everything you'd want in a good leader, and they've never been trained in that capacity. It's just the way that they are now. Those people aren't all over the place. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the jobs that we've got for those working for someone else. I'm not talking for you and your education empire there, but for those that are us working in the world of work, like in advocacy, you finding these exceptional X factor leaders is not an easy thing, but they're out there. But I've also seen people developed into extremely good leaders, and I work with a lot of these very good leaders, which has been to my benefit in my world of work, at least. All right, final theme here, Damon, and this one is sort of a hindcasting, looking back on your pathway as a leader.
Yeah.
What would you say to a younger Damon Joseph about being an effective leader? You go back and whisper something to yourself that would make you a more effective leader. What would you say to a younger you?
Yeah, good question. I think it's okay to challenge the status quo. It's okay to make the unpopular choice, but own it in a way where you don't have disclaimers. Own it in a way where you're not seeking the approval of others. If you know deep down that this is what you're capable of, and it sort of ties in with what you sort of just were alluding to before, mate, with on school days, and I'll take it back because I suppose that's something we both have in our past that we connect with. In school days, mate, it's the unlikely kid that I work with these days that perhaps there's a stereotype that kid doesn't fit the mold of the leader because they're disruptive, because they're sometimes ill-mannered, they can't commit and focus on what it is. But I often find, mate, it's sometimes the privilege we have, you go and you speak to that younger person that might have been a younger Damon or Eric, and you say to them, mate, I can see the strength in you, and I know what you're good at. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And then all of a sudden that person gives a real account of who they are, and you tell them, and I tell them, and I genuinely say it, and I tell them, I love that. That's awesome. And I can see you. And one kid told me about 3 weeks ago, he said, I love cars. I said, would you like to have your own shop one day, mate? And he said, yeah, I'd love that. And I said, what would you do? Would you work on the cars, or would you get a team and get them to do it? And he just started getting into it. You could see how passionate he was. And I said, I can see you doing that. And he said, really? You reckon I could do it? And I said, 100% you'll do it. I said, actually, you'll probably be fixing my car in about 5 years' time. And I could see that kid all of a sudden feel this sense of, why not? And I thought to myself, this is the power. So to my younger self, maybe I live vicariously through the work I do now, and I picture, that this is the young Eric or the young Pete or the Andre or, Liam or all these guys that we went to school with, you know what I mean? I say that's what it is, and I think that's what I'd say to myself. So what I'd say to myself, I say to young people just like me.
Thank you for sharing that. It's not out of left field, I think, for me to say that I'm not surprised, knowing you personally, but from your professional travels, that and maybe this goes to those that get into the education field, that this is what drives you as professionals. So despite the fact that you're not at a school, if you look at the structure, and I've looked at this before we talked, and so please correct any assumptions if I assume too much here, but it looks like all of the businesses that you've created have in some way reach out in an education sense in the different fields in very different ways, but it's still in that same field, except in your case, you're the one that's setting that agenda, and that's what helps to drive what it is that you do. So if you were the person receiving the feedback, or I don't know if you'd say this to a young person, but I can see you being a teacher and then opening up an education empire at some point down the track. And it's that sense of empowering kids that don't fit the mold, I think would be quite a satisfying thing if that's what drives you, is what you're passionate about in your work. And that's definitely come out in the podcast today, mate. As always, I'd like to thank my podcast guest, Damon Joseph, for his time. Lots to take away from the discussion with Damon. The thing that resonated with me the most was, if you're going to challenge the status quo, you need to own it. I think that's a fantastic way to look at life, and it's something that can get people animated to do something different in their careers. Pretty much you're in control of what you do, and to that extent, get out and follow what you're passionate about. This particular podcast, Damon demonstrated that quite clearly that he values his people, he values his integrity in his business, and fantastic overview of what his leadership journey was. So again, could not recommend this podcast more to people that want to learn about leadership and what I think authentic leadership looks like. Once again, thank you for joining me on this podcast. A lot more content to come. And for those that want to follow this podcast, you can do so through LinkedIn, or you can follow us on Talking Leadership on YouTube. If you can, please subscribe to grow the support for the channel so I can do a lot more content into the future. Your help is greatly appreciated. Again, thank you, and I'll catch you all on the next podcast.